Hello all, I'm Kel Kidman, welcome to Breaking On the Daily, and today we have the ATF going after AR pistols, vaccines, general updates, and Joe Biden saying he's not worried about the accusations against Biden and is calling them foul play. All this and more. Now, let's begin with the ATF going after AR pistols. They have new guidelines that they're suggesting. And man, they are completely ridiculous. And not to mention the fact that they are completely obtuse and opaque, as is customary with the ATF. As they are requiring, or are proposing to require, now that AR pistols, essentially pistols, AR-15s with a short barrel and a arm brace, and for those who don't know much about firearms, essentially you can get what is kind of an SBR. It's not an SBR by the ATF standards, but it's kind of an SBR. You can get one, an AR pistol, if it either doesn't have a stock or has an arm brace that has certain requirements. But as of recently, and I'm sorry about the dog, as of recently, the ATF has been going after it more and more, with them being completely inconsistent about how they actually measure and talk about arm bases. A famous one being the honey badger that happened, I think, a month or two ago, and they went after that arm brace for completely inconsistent reasons, because they said, oh, the length of pull was too long when they didn't even measure it correctly. It was completely ridiculous. So it was just a nonsensical situation. Once again, sorry about the dog. Not even going to cut it, but and now they seem to be going after AR pistols entirely, trying to get them all to be registered as essentially NFA items, I think is what they're trying to propose. But this is completely ridiculous. And, you know, a lot of this could have been stopped if the DC versus Heller decision was better than it is. And, you know, this is kind of a more controversial opinion I have, because a lot of people do like the DC versus Heller decision, but I think that it is a poisonous decision in certain respects. And the reason I believe this is it has to do with the common use standard it applies and created with this decision. For those who don't know anything about the Heller versus DC decision, they decided that because the particular firearms that were in question, and I don't remember quite what the specifics of the case were, but I do remember what the explanation for the decision was. They decided essentially that since the things which were being banned in DC had common usage, the regulation across the country, the regulation was unconstitutional. Now, here's the problem with that. Because when exactly do you determine common use? Do you determine common use at the time of the regulation being implemented, or do you determine it based on what is happening right now? Because depending on that circumstance, it changes the decision drastically. Because if you were to determine it based on when the decision was made, or when the regulation was put into place, things change a lot. Such as the NFA becomes completely untenable, because a lot of what was banned by the NFA, or heavily regulated and then banned, was actually in common usage before it was heavily regulated. And that gets missed by the Heller and DC decision. It also opens up the idea that we can do regulation on guns in degrees. So essentially you can regulate guns enough to the point where they fall out of common usage and then ban them outright, and that's totally fine. Obviously that is a violation of the Second Amendment, and all of those regulations going up to the ban would be a violation of the Second Amendment. But based on the Heller versus DC decision, it would be totally fine, because common use standard, that's just how common use standard works. Also, it's unclear that common use standard applies to when the regulation was actually posted and not when the case was brought. So, and to explain this, if you were to bring up common use standard as an explanation for why the NFA were to be repealed, it would be very easy for the defense to make the argument, well, if automatic weapons, say you were going after the ban of automatic weapons and production and such of automatic weapons, they would make the argument that automatic weapons are not in common usage, and that would be accurate to today's world. But the question would be at that point, does that matter? Or does it matter what happened when the act was actually passed? And it's unclear, and I don't think the court, especially based on more recent decisions, that the court would actually hear it and decide in the favor of the Second Amendment and of the Constitution. I think it's entirely unclear. They might even say you lack standing, because that seems to be their favorite argument, especially nonsensical argument. But I don't exactly expect this to go through, this ATF new regulation to go through. It may go through, and but I don't think it will be, because in this case, common use standard actually would do the job in actually preventing this sort of regulation from going through, because AR pistols are super popular, and especially in the gun community. They are very, very popular and are in common usage. So attempting to ban it or heavily regulate it, as the ATF is attempting to do, would be in violation of that common use standard. But it's important that that case needs to get up to the Supreme Court. And though there is a supposed 6-3 majority conservative on the Supreme Court, I'm not entirely sure that would actually happen. But we'll have to see. This is a developing situation, and it is worrying, because the more encroachment on your right to defend yourself, your right to have the means to defend yourself, the less free, frankly, you are. The less self-determined you can be. But anyway, on to our next story, and this one is a huge doozy because it has a whole bunch of headlines. It's a complicated situation, but vaccines. VP Pence, the Second Lady, and the Surgeon General get the COVID vaccine. And they got this live on TV, and, I'm fine with it. I think it's a show, and I don't like charade politics, so, this sort of pomp and circumstance nonsense that happens all the time. And, man, I just came up with a good word there. Charade politics. I think that's what I'm going to call that from now on. So, yeah, the charade politics that we have going on with Dr. Fauci getting it and Mike Pence getting it and people complaining about Trump not getting it despite the fact that he already had the disease and so wouldn't need it in the first place. All of that sort of stuff. And, this comes around the same time that you're seeing something completely ridiculous from Twitter. And this is a story about how Twitter is going to remove tweets containing vaccine misinformation, starting in 2021, and certain other COVID misinformation. Now, how do they define vaccine misinformation? They define vaccine misinformation as essentially acknowledging the fact that side effects exist. Now, there has been a whole debate about anti-vax versus pro-vax and all this sort of stuff. And, it's one of the most inane, nonsensical debates I've ever seen, mostly because both sides are incredibly stupid, but for entirely different reasons. But, it just frustrates me. Because you have on one side, you have the anti-vaxxers, the people who think that all vaccines are evil and they're all out to get you and, they're trying to sterilize the population and all that sort of stuff. And these things are not well evidenced and all this sort of thing. The sort of vaccines are evil crowd. And those people are ridiculous. But then on the other side, you have a bunch of people saying, vaccines are magic. They have no consequences whatsoever. There are no side effects, nothing. If you even question whether there are side effects to any given vaccine, particularly vaccines that we have deigned as golden boys that cannot be questioned, then, there's going to be all these problems. And we're going to complain at you incessantly and claim that you're anti-vax. No, that is not the case. I'm not normally one to be a huge fan of the sort of Nuance brigade. I generally find that most of their positions are moral cowardice rather than based in actual thought or anything of the sort. And most of the time, a lot of their positions are not based, rather than a sort of principled position or an attempt to get at the correctness of any given position and trying to meet in the middle or what have you. It's more an act in denial of basic moral truths and in favor of trying to get across whatever personal thing they want to do. But in this case, having a nuanced position is fine. Not only is it fine, it's completely warranted and the only reasonable position you could have. Because you have a dichotomy of two sides having completely nonsensical positions of believing either that vaccines are completely evil and are never work under any circumstances, or vaccines are completely magical and have no consequences, no side effects, no nothing under any circumstances, and if you even question it, then you're evil. That's the dichotomy you see with the vaccine issue. It's so dumb. It's so just lacking in terms of actual understanding of the issue. Because here's the fact of the matter. Pfizer has accepted themselves that there are consequences and side effects to their vaccine, particularly with those with severe allergies or those who are young. Okay? It's something that people have not mentioned, and it's something which has gotten almost no coverage, is the fact that vaccines, and the coronavirus vaccine, specifically the Pfizer one, I don't know as much about the Moderna one, specifically the Pfizer one, is more there are more symptoms to the Pfizer vaccine among young people than there are among old people. Now, this creates a great spectrum of whether you should get the vaccine or not. Because let's be frank, the reasonable position is that everyone should make their own risk assessment on whether they want to take the vaccine or not, or whether they're willing to take the risk of getting COVID or whatever. And for themselves, it shouldn't have anything to do with the government. And frankly, it is completely legitimate for someone to say, yeah, I don't find a lot of use in actually getting the vaccine, especially with the risk of whatever have you. And with this vaccine in particular, you have a very clear kind of spectrum on where you may land. Because the younger you are, and thus the less susceptible to COVID you are, at least in terms of age, not necessarily, actual health conditions that might have something else to do with it, I don't know. But for those who are younger, you're more likely to actually have adverse effects happen to you with the vaccine. And in that case, it's completely legitimate for you to say, I don't really want to get it. And you're seeing these stories go around of things like nurses fainting while talking to press about getting COVID-19 vaccine. Now, the explanation in this case is that, the nurse faints all the time from pain. In that case, why is she talking to the press immediately after getting a vaccine? Why is she the public face, essentially? I don't really believe that explanation. And the reason is, and I'm not saying that it necessarily has something to do with the vaccine. It could be that. I mean, it really could. But I don't see the explanation, and I don't see the justification of having that person particularly go over and talk to the press when you know that's a high likelihood. I mean, because apparently that was known. Apparently that's not uncommon for her. And in that case, why isn't she just going and resting after the vaccine if she knows this is likely to happen? I don't know. It doesn't make sense. Not saying it has anything to do with the vaccine. It might not. It also might have something to do with the vaccine. Same goes with the Bell Papsy thing that was going around. We don't actually know whether that has anything to do with the vaccine. It might have nothing to do with the vaccine. But that's something to look into, obviously. And for those who are younger, it might justify you not getting the vaccine because the trade-off, frankly, isn't worth it. Because what gets lost in all of this is that the majority of people who get COVID don't know they got COVID. I may have had COVID and just not realized it. You may have had COVID and just not realized it. I am young enough to the point where COVID is not a huge risk to me, so I don't see why I would get it. I essentially see the COVID-19 vaccine the same way I see the flu vaccine. I don't see the need for myself to get the flu vaccine every year. The same goes with the COVID-19 vaccine. Until I get to the point where my health condition or my age gets to the point where these diseases are actually legitimately threatening to me on a regular basis, I don't see the need to actually go out of my way to get something like a vaccine for it. And I've already talked extensively about how I don't believe the whole fear-mongering about how if you don't get a vaccine, that it's somehow going to affect other people. It's stupid. The whole point of getting a vaccine is that you're immune, not that other people are immune. It's stupid, and I don't acknowledge it as a legitimate concern, but whatever. And to be clear, I think it's just the Pfizer vaccine in a lot of cases. Because the Moderna vaccine, in a lot of ways, looks better. It's not as though these vaccines can't get better. I'm not saying that. Obviously, a new vaccine, a new type of vaccine, is going to have kinks. It's going to have problems. We should expect that. That happens with literally everything in reality. Once again, it's why I don't agree with the vaccines are magic crowd. You have more options than that. There are kinks, and the Moderna vaccine looks like it may be better. For instance, after the Moderna vaccine, in this particular story, this is a story from the Wall Street Journal talking about how the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine could widen the immunization effort. And the reason for that is that the Moderna vaccine is actually easier to store, because it can be stored more easily for longer amounts of time, for 30 days as opposed to 5 with the Pfizer vaccine. That makes it so that there's a lot more wiggle area with regard to sort of mistakes and being able to more readily actually use the vaccine. It's much easier in that case. And Moderna vaccine, I've seen less reports of actual side effects. Of course, it's yet to be seen. It's not going to be actually approved until later today. And that is yet to be seen for a few weeks. I still expect to see some symptoms. I've already read about a few, but there may be less than the Pfizer vaccine. The Moderna vaccine might be better. I mean, the idea that vaccines have no side effects, that there are no side effects to vaccines like the Pfizer vaccine or what have you, it kind of denotes that there is no legitimate improvement in vaccines. Because if there's no side effects to the Pfizer vaccine, the only thing you could potentially get better at is a higher level of immunization. Other than that, a simple aspect, you couldn't improve it in any way. But I'm sitting here saying, well, there may be kinks to the Pfizer vaccine, there may be kinks to the Moderna vaccine, and I'm sure there are. There are new experimental things. These are, I think, the first coronavirus vaccines ever produced, and I'm not just talking about COVID-19, but coronavirus in general, because remember, there have been 18 other versions of coronavirus. So, of course, there's going to be kinks. This is an entirely new thing. I don't expect it to be perfect, and it's not an unreasonable expectation for me. The people who have unreasonable expectations are those who are talking about, oh, there's no side effects, you should just take it, there's no risk assessment to be done. It's just obviously untrue. But anyway, on to our last story for the day, and this is we're in a shorter video, yesterday was a bit of a doozy. It's almost 30 minutes. But today is a bit shorter. But and our last story is Joe Biden says he's not worried about the accusations against Hunter Biden, calls them foul play. He's talking about the investigation. It's been argued that he's talking actually about the media and how that was covered in October, which is ridiculous, by the way. Because what the media was covering in October, what people like I and the New York Post and all those sorts of people were talking about in October, is exactly what was being investigated. Particularly myself, who was explicitly saying, no, we shouldn't talk about the loot stuff. We shouldn't talk about all the exposing pictures of Hunter Biden. We should only be talking about the things that have to do with Hunter Biden and his financial deals, which may have something to do with Joe Biden, based on all these emails that we've seen and all that sort of stuff. The investigation is about that. It is about his taxes. It's about all of these things. So this sort of trying to play with the words there that Stephen Colbert did, and people claiming, oh no, it has nothing to do with the investigation. He's not questioning the investigation. It's just wordplay. It doesn't mean anything because there's no functional distinction between the allegations that a lot of the media was making and the allegations that the investigation is making. At least not the serious ones that pertain to himself, to Joe Biden. But of course, he's just allowed to laugh this off and talk as though nothing's happening, because the media is completely subservient to the DNC. As if I'm saying anything new there. It's entirely obvious, and has been obvious for a very long time. Throughout the entirety of the Barack Obama administration, that has been the case. It's just so dumb. And it's funny because he's still talking about how there are still people talking about how, well, the claims that Donald Trump was making were what got him impeached. Dude, this investigation has been going on for more than a year. And for those who don't know, the impeachment only started this year. And I was talking about a phone call from, I think, October in 2019. So this investigation was going on at the time. So he was talking to the Ukraine and the Ukraine leadership about an active investigation that was going on in his DOJ at the time. That's what Trump was doing. That's what he got impeached over. How ridiculous is that? That the impeachment of Donald Trump back in 2019 was based on the idea that he was talking, and now that we understand all in the context surrounding it, that he was talking to the Ukraine president about them cooperating with an investigation into Hunter Biden that the DOJ was doing at the time. And a very serious investigation at that not only included his ties to Ukraine, but also to China, another key player in the whole impeachment thing. And I'm fairly sure, if I remember the whole saga correctly, another place where China was talking about investigations. And you're sitting here telling me he didn't know about it. He totally did. He totally knew about it. He knew about it the entire time. All right, I think it's undeniable at this point. Because his actions at the time are completely unexplainable otherwise. He totally knew there was an investigation going on. And yeah, I totally expect that Trump has set a bomb here. And that he's going to... and if Biden gets in, if Biden does get rigged in there and he gets appointed and all that sort of stuff, if that happens, there's a bomb and he's going to be investigated for the next 3 years. And it will be the most sweet payback I have ever seen. And I am very excited to see that happen. But that is where I'm going to leave you today. This has been Breaking on the Daily. I'm Cal Kidman, and I'm out.